This is the short story The Overnaut. Copyright 2005. Taken from the anthology Séances with the Living, released in 2010. The water lapped at Far, making him feel like he was about to dissolve like a redoxin tablet. It was late, although the sun on Mars let you know it in ways that were different from Earth. You noticed this especially if you were a recent arrival. Far's breaststroke took him to the side of the canal. Touching the sandstone wall, he produced a hip flask of brandy. "Okay, time out," he told himself. "Let's analyze this properly. Oh, properly, ha!" Far smiled to himself. He had paid for this trip to take a break from having to do things properly. But that was if anyone could say that Gregory Farr, 57, single, loaded, and happily disinterested in his fellow man's welfare, had to do anything for himself. "Hey, $73,000 is better loaded into a bar tab," he mused. You had to laugh, and if you were Greg Farr, you had to be in hysterics. His mother's little dreamer and the inheritor of his father's software solutions company was the founder of something that could give thrill-seekers something better than a ride in a MiG Foxbat or a space station jaunt. The sun's rays made the canal water shimmer now. Yes, this really was Mars. Farr had to pinch himself once in a while, just to make sure that the dream amplifier wasn't cutting out on him. Yes, the dream amplifier. In the winter of 2017, some boffins he had hired had stumbled on the big secret for him. But that wasn't to say that these paid researchers themselves hadn't dreamed. For all Farr knew, they probably had thrown in their 2 pennies worth of hopes and delusions while they had worked out their contracts for his glory. Farr savoured the sweet far water and then dug a toe against the canal wall. Yes, this was all about dreaming. His past had been about dreaming too. Too many weird dreams had inspired Farr to plough millions from his security and room-booking software company over to research into astral projection, dreams. What you did was you went to sleep all wired up, electrodes monitoring while a special electrode literally plooped the images out of your mind, fed them into a database that structured everything, and then uploaded it to the dedicated amplifier. The amplifier then trained a beam on the part of the reachable building, planet, star, or galaxy you wanted to interact with, and mobilized air or gas particles within the set coordinates there. Alternatively, if you wanted to enhance the reality factor in your own dreams, or take up a role in, say, a movie, all you had to do was train the beam on your head, or your MP8 player, whichever took your fancy. Now, these little tricks all came under the heading of quote-unquote ambassadorship. Meanwhile, a separate device used the feedback to make sure that what you were actually dreaming was where you wanted to be. And the computer had a list of your dream wants. It sculpted the dreams for you, while a safety device made sure that you couldn't ambassador yourself into other people and harm them. But Farr had factored that one in early on as a criterion, more because of the lawsuit and jail threats, though, than concern for the next man, of course. And in that first year he had done it all. Gone to the moon, delivered his long-departed grandmother a birthday present, even played the lead role in his favourite Christmas movie. Aww. Back then it had been done in a clinic, and it had been primitive, sweaty, and very, very risky, though. Defibrillators and trained staff on standby, just like he was actually about to cross the Great Divide to the afterlife. But Greg Farr had survived the early days just fine, thank you very much. And when word got out about his machine, it hadn't taken long for the first inquiries to come from the bored and the desperate in society's highest echelons. It was funny what $3 million orders a month from 80 of the world's richest people could do. Farr had bought an old missile silo in Arizona to the headlines of "Disarmament Dreamer Launches Fantasy Complex." He had initially told the press that they were designing a peace machine in there. It wasn't exactly a lie, because sleeping was, more often than not, about being at peace. But then the press had gone and twisted it to mean that Farr was authoring and realizing a total end to war. Luckily, no Nobel Prize had ever been bestowed for his efforts or his public spiritedness. That might have been embarrassing after all. You see, people were fools, but Farr had always needed people to keep making fools of in order for him to stay on top. He took another swig of brandy, then checked over the lip of the canal to survey the horizon. The day was dull. Even the red tinge couldn't make it glow with the exotic romance expounded by writers like Bradbury or Asimov. Replacing the hip flask in his pocket, Farr patted his trousers. Could do with a little tweaking, he said. A cool canal's supposed to feel clammy through these. He returned to his swim, trying to think positively. Oh yes, the press had really tried to burn him over that hoax once they had discovered it, and of course the church had ranted about it so much that he was expecting them to crucify him themselves. That it wasn't just immoral that sleeping souls could be guided from their nature and their maker, but it was impossible anyway. Impossible? Farr asked a faint dot in the sky that he could be Earth if he wanted it to. Here he was, on Mars. Now, that was a bit more than a little impossible, don't you witch doctors think? He told the dot that he decided now definitely was Earth. All I've got to do is point my machine somewhere and I'm there in my dream time. Bam! Farr smiled again. The water was cool. It was summer out here on Mars. They had started terraforming the planet back in 2013. Only a tiny strip 3 widths of the Nile had been seeded with biodomes and trees. The biodomes were far bigger than even the Eden Project, the biosphere Farr had visited once in Cornwall, many years before. Why, you can't even tell there's a dome up there, he thought now, looking up. The canal only ran for 16 miles, but boy were they ever the prettiest, most restful 16 miles in the whole universe. Wait, he suddenly sensed tiredness coming to his arms. Better note this down for future reference, he told himself, then grabbed the lip of the canal wall. But the wall felt too smooth to be the sandstone Farr had taken it for. He ground his fingertips together just then, frowning when no warmth came to them. The dream machine still needed tweaking. Farr's life insurance policy wasn't as bendable. If anything went wrong, though, at least nobody would benefit from his death. Farr hauled himself out of the canal and then surveyed all around. A few clumps and clods of coppered dirt from a sandstorm winked at him from beyond the saplings, proof of a sandstorm outside the 500-foot-tall biodome. Patting himself dry, noting the lack of shivering he should have felt, Farr looked back at the way he had come. He remembered having arrived close to the edge of the biodome, pretty far back now. That's okay, you can't die here, he reaffirmed to his reflection in the canal water. A dreamt, jeweled reflection, but a reflection nonetheless. Even if I were to hold myself underwater for an hour, my body back in the lab would only convulse until I woke up. There were rules, though, and he knew it. A person having this kind of experience could see themselves and their reflections. They could feel like they were touching things, but they could never actually touch things. For example, if you wanted to try something really nuts, you could even try singing Faust to a packed Sydney opera house in high summer. You'd be a ghost, of course, and that ghost factor was the grey area. When you travelled this way, you couldn't lift actual items or perform any real physical operation that resulted in an effect. Even $1 trillion worth of developments couldn't snub Isaac Newton and his laws. No, this machine was all about duping yourself into believing that all of you was where only your consciousness had actually been transported. The Martian light twinkled a spilled purse of diamonds on the canal farther back from where Farr stood. Oh yes, there would be a flood of legal problems, and he knew it with this thing. Imagine fraudsters vanishing to exact coordinates to look over people's shoulders at passwords at ATMs and online banking screens. And his teams were already working on a device that could ensure privacy so no two users would be within sight of one another. The coordinates of private addresses, art galleries, banks, etc. would have to be blocked if a general release version of his machine was ever to be made. Farr walked up to a pine sapling and rubbed a needle between his finger and thumb. Lifting it to his nose, he smiled. Bingo, you really can smell things. He turned to behold the sun through the transparent paneling of the biodome. I can stare at you for hours if I want to, and there's nothing you can do to me, he told its dull, dusty traffic light disk. Nothing, not a thing. I am the creator of worlds. No soul can touch me. I can't drown in a canal. My arms only got tired back there because I thought they ought to be tired after all that, that's all. Why, I could kill death if I wanted to up here, and no one can stop me. Farr took his hip flask and tried picking up a rock with his other hand. The rock looked like it was in his hand for a moment, but then it faded, very gradually. Farr's eyes fell to find that the rock on the ground had never actually been lifted. It sat, the vermilion light playing over its pitted crags and dips, to make something like a conceited old woman's face. He took another swig of brandy. At least that's real. At least I feel like I'm getting a bit tipsy. Hey, let's try doing something tipsy, he said, then flung the hip flask into the canal. He watched the flask bob for a moment before it vanished. The price of being rich, he thought. You get bored too easily. Clusters of air bubbles on the water reminded Farr of something just then. Mars is just too dry, though. Next dream jaunt I take is going to be that South Pacific one, he promised the canal. Yeah, underwater. Maybe go all the way down to where those Japanese fishermen dragged up that dinosaur carcass in the 70s. That was a marvellous thing about the Dream Machine. Because you went places only really with your mind, Farr had suggested to the boffins that maybe they could research a time travel feature. It was feasible, after all. The light from stars took years to reach Earth. Aliens with strong enough telescopes could therefore see yesterday's news breaking anywhere in the world if they wanted to. Now, if there was some way the Dream Machine could be adapted to see light coming off past events here on Earth, Farr thought, as he had often thought, drum roll, then all they needed to do was overcome the speed of light. Won't that be fun? He had thought time after time after time. Farr took off his shirt and wrung it out, studying the way the water left the fabric, making sure the drops fell properly and not like they were in a dream. Time. Give me events from history, or at least planets with alien beings on them. Aliens. The lapping of the canal made him think of Earth again. Or how about a trip up the Nile in ancient times? See if all that gods, pyramids, and monsters garbage wasn't just thought up by some joker with too much weed smouldering in his pipe. Farr blinked. Something near the water had moved, had really moved. That's not supposed to happen, he whispered. Yet it was happening. A shadow was darkening to Farr's right. He staggered backwards until a tree sapling jabbed at his shoulder blades. This time he could really feel his body weight making something he had touched move. He wheeled round and saw the sapling swagger and shake itself to a halt. That wasn't supposed to happen either. He turned round, his eyes peeling the tableau before him, the shadow solidifying now from wispy smoke to cement grey to charcoal to washed-out matte black, the colour of a t-shirt that had been washed for the 1000th time. And then there it was, the shadow of a boat. Farr shook his head and blinked hard, praying that it was some minor malfunction in the Dream Machine, something that one of the technicians had already spotted and was compensating for by activating one of the 6 backup systems. The shadow, but where was the boat itself? Cut it out, Farr, he seethed. I don't need this from you. Am I going nuts? He hissed. The boat's shadow had slowed to a stop. The shadow of an anchor appeared. Farr heard it plop into the canal water. He shook his head for a long time, but that didn't help, because he could still hear the voices babbling in a foreign, ancient tongue that he somehow knew had to be Old Egyptian. Okay, you guys in the lab, wake me up right now, he said to the sapling's trunk. But the sapling wasn't interested. Far turned and saw that it had grown, the trunk thicker, wiser. And it had changed from a pine into a... Far looked up to find a canopy of palm fronds waving lethargically below a blue sky. Palms? And that sky, taunting him with an easy freedom, with its lapis lazuli featurelessness. Blue sky? This is Mars, though. Far caught the moving stick-like shadow out of the corner of his eye and ducked. The spear thunked into the bough of the palm just behind him. Far slapped his own face. No, he definitely wasn't dreaming the fear in his heart from seeing the jackal-headed god Anubis standing by the wrapped body that was lying in the middle of the boat. And he certainly wasn't dreaming the thump-thump-thumping of the two Nubian slaves' feet as they ran towards him. "Oh, Jesus, warp, warp, warp!" Far gasped. "It's a dream! Only a dream!" The hands clutching Far's wrists begged to differ. "Bring him closer," the jackal-headed god in the boat commanded. Far's kneecaps burned as he was dragged across the stony sand. "Oh, please, I don't know what this is, but I—" "Who dares observe the passage of the boat of millions of years?" the jackal-headed god boomed. "Do you know the jeopardy in which you have placed the ka, the spirit of this body, by watching with profane eyes?" Far's heart sank into his guts, like an anvil placed in a vat of marshmallow. "Oh, please, I'm just here by accident. This is a dream." The eyes in the jackal head glinted cold judgment. "This place cannot be found by mere dreamers. You are here by another means. Declare it." Jesus, Far thought when he noticed that the jackal teeth were real. He wasn't worried about the gazillion amendments that would now have to be made to his new model of the dream machine. He wasn't worried about the costs involved. He wasn't even worried about adding the time machine facet anymore. All Far could think was when the hell the men in the lab were going to stick the adrenaline into his chest to knock him out of this obvious near-death phenomenon. The breath wafting over Far's face was hot and fetid, like it had come from a mouth that had been Stilton-cheesed or wet dog-fooded to death the night before. "Oh my God, am I dead?" he asked the jackal head. "Because if I am, I never believed in you, so why am I here?" He gasped as the creature reached a clawed hand over his chest. It held it there for a moment before nodding to the two slaves. Far felt the aches in his wrists now, as surely as if they had been run over by a pair of motorcycles. "The god you serve has no place in the Duat, the river of the dead. It is a god of arrogance, greed, and avarice. Gold rules only the living. Gold. This is one secret of the afterlife I shall share with you as you are here now." Far rubbed the cold patch on his chest where the hand had pressed. "What do you mean here now?" The slave stepped back into the boat with extreme reverence. "You are the first to reach here by such means," Anubis, the jackal-headed one, told Far. "While you are not dead as men know death, your greed has taken you to a forbidden place which you may never leave. I understand from your ravings that you came here to seek a dream. And from your mind I know that you have mocked myself and my brethren who care for your feeble species. Know then that this is a place where dreams are sought by an older power, and for true purpose, not idle pleasure." Far gasped. "Oh, please, I'm not a bad man." "Hence why I bid you remain here," Anubis told him, "as custodian of the Duat." "What?" "You will learn from the dead you see taken along the Duat to Osiris, Lord of the Dead. In time you may decide that you are ready to journey to the realm of Osiris. For now, however, you will need time to appreciate the place of dreams for what it is. Your link to your device, your world, your greed has been broken." Far felt himself fainting just then being drawn upright on his feet. "Here," the god continued, "I suggest you harvest the palms over there. My slaves will need to eat dates to survive the journey back to receive the next body we shall convey here."